The following is a Shaw Public Affairs presentation.
The NDP is hungry. They are hungry, and they are determined to find their way back into power. And we will need all hands on deck to make sure that they don't get what they want.
Good evening and welcome to Voice of BC. I'm Vaughn Palmer, and you just saw the Premier off the top there. And tonight's guest, smiling Adrian Dix of the NDP. Welcome to the show.
Great to be on the show, Vaughn.
Congratulations on the new job. I guess it's, what, a month now?
It's just been a month, just about. It was a very exciting campaign. We had a great campaign. It was a close finish. Mike Farnworth and John Horgan ran great campaigns for the leadership as well. Nicholas Simons. We had a really good debate. And well, I got the most votes. It wasn't a surprise to me. It was close because they were great candidates.
And you just completed a tour of the Okanagan, and you got Dix Mania happening up there.
I wouldn't overstate the Dix Mania side of it. I don't want to overstate that. But we addressed some real issues in the Okanagan. As you know, tree fruit growers are having real problems right now. The cost to produce a pound of apples is about 23 cents. The prices are about 12.5 cents. And this has been 3 consecutive years of that. So I had to put forward a 3-point plan of action for the government. I'm hoping the government takes me up on the proposal and takes some action to support tree fruit growers in the Okanagan. So we did that. We went up to Vernon, where they've had a crisis in their hospital for really a period of 7 or 8 years. All through the time I was health critic, there's frequently dozens of people admitted to the Vernon Jubilee Hospital in the emergency room who can't get up to the wards because every space is full in the wards. And then I was down in Penticton as well. I think it's very promising for the NDP in the Okanagan. It was a big center of support for me in my leadership campaign, but as well, I think that in those constituencies, the constituencies that have voted Liberal in every election since 1991, that there's a real desire for change, a sense that they've been neglected, that they haven't been heard, that they're taken for granted by the Liberal Party, and that's why I was in the Okanagan first, and I'm going to be going back again and again.
The answer you just gave me illustrates what people say about you. Lots of detail.
Yes.
Really serious. I mean, that's your style in politics.
That's my style in politics. I think that's what people want, you know. I think the government itself has been not very serious in recent times. I mean, since the last election, we have real problems in public health care in BC, real problems in public education. I think everyone acknowledges it. There's differences about what direction we should go. But in the main areas of government, we really haven't had the government take any action, have any agenda. They introduced the HST, but other than that, it's been 2 years. You can't really argue there have been very many successes. And now we have a government that one day is saying the HST is revenue neutral, and you know, it's not going to cost any more money, it's not a tax increase, and that's a reason to support the HST. And then the exact same people, Falcon and Hanson and Premier Clark, the next day are saying, oh, well, it's not revenue neutral, and that's a reason to support the HST. So I think after 10 years, they've kind of run out of gas, and what the people of BC want, when I talk to them, is serious answers, a serious approach, a real strategy to deal with today's problems.
We had an opinion poll come out this week. Ipsos Reid did a survey. They did it just around the 2nd anniversary of the Liberal government, so 2nd week of May. And here's what they found. We're going to put a little slide up. So on the first one, it's how you're going to vote. And Liberals 41, NDP 39. Pollster tells us that's a dead heat. The margin of error on the poll is bigger than the gap between the two, so that's a dead heat. I'll explain the leader thing in a bit. I want to ask Adrian Dix, first of all, you comfortable starting in a dead heat? That's not bad for a new leader.
I'm fine with it. I think really you can overstate the polls right now. I think a lot of people want to hear from us. I think we showed in the Vancouver Point Grey by-election, I know we'll talk about that later, but we showed in the Point Grey by-election that if you put forward a serious candidate, and we had a great candidate in David Eby, and you talk in a positive way about the issues, we talked about environmental issues, really specifically, really good ideas that the government itself ought to consider on the environment, on pesticides and banning cosmetic pesticides, and I'm hopeful that the Premier will act on that, on environmental youth teams to get young people involved in environmental issues and really able to get some of the training they need to pursue and advance our green industries. Those kind of ideas that we put forward, we addressed offshore drilling. We addressed tankers off the coast, and of course we addressed public education issues in the campaign. People responded really well to that. I mean, our vote
came
went up.
awful close.
Our vote went up.
3 points?
Got closer actually in the final count. We did very well, over 45% in a riding where the previous week in the federal election, in that the overlapping constituency, we had received 13%. The NDP had received 13%. So it was a very good showing. And I think, what I think is that if we put forward a positive message, a detailed message, we tell people what we're going to do, we tell them how we're going to pay for it, that they're going to respond positively to that. And you saw in the by-election a little bit what the Liberals did at the end, which is they didn't really have a message, a positive message, other than, you know, I'm the Premier, I am here. And that was their kind of message. And then at the end, when that wasn't working, they ran, I think, put forward, you know, I've seen a lot of political pamphlets over the years, probably the nastiest, most vicious pamphlet I've ever seen, authorized by Christy Clark.
Well, now, they called them pro-polygamy, pro-pornography, and pro-hard drugs. Now, how is that negative?
Well, it's exactly the same kind of messaging that they used in Vancouver-Fraserview in the Cash Heat campaign, right, just before the last election. The only difference was that this one said authorized by the Liberal Party. But really, that was the message the Premier, who wants to change politics, she says, that was her core message at the end of the campaign. And I think it was a case of both candidates, both leaders, putting forward the kind of campaigns they're going to run. And ours was fresh and positive, and theirs was harsh and negative, and we did well.
I think they thought they had it in the bag until about 10 days to go, and they had to go negative. But
well, but you know, why did they have to go negative? I mean, that's the question.
Because they thought it was too close. They thought they were going to lose. I'm just guessing what happened.
But you know, I think in a way, it's discouraging to people in politics. I actually think their negative ads and negative leaflets hurt their campaign, didn't help them. I do in the end. I think a lot of people I spoke to when I knocked on doors there, I went to the riding 7 times. I knocked on doors in the riding. I think people's reaction was quite negative to the Premier going into a constituency that she wanted to represent. She said she was going to represent. She was part of the community. She was involved in the neighborhood association. She was going to represent forever. Then at the last second, making this kind of negative attack, which seemed contrary to what she had said both in her leadership campaign and in that by-election campaign about what she was going to do. I think that people reacted badly to that.
In your speech to Provincial Council on the weekend, you said the other thing that came out of Point Grey, as far as you were concerned, was that the NDP was going to run hard in seats that it intended not to try very hard in. I shouldn't say not try very hard. You have to send your resources where you think they'll do the most good, and you seem to be saying there's a lot of ridings that aren't going to be, that you said something like no safe seat for the Liberals.
I think there should be no safe Liberal seat. I think we're recruiting candidates. We're encouraging people to run for nominations all over British Columbia. I think when you look at, for example, a region like the Okanagan, which I visited many times as health critic, you go from Salmon Arm to the border, to the Boundary Similkameen seat.
So 7 seats.
7 seats. The NDP has lost them in every election since 1991, and that has to change. If you look east of Surrey, south of the Fraser, about the same number of seats, about 7 seats. You go 0 for 14 in those 2 regions of the province, and you're not going to win too many general elections. Chilliwack Hope, we have an excellent chance in against Barry Penner. We lost by a relatively small margin last time. Vernon, we lost by 3 to 4%. Boundary Similkameen, I think we've got just superb candidates, 3 of them for the nomination. I think there's a lot of hope in these seats, and I think it's good for politics. People in Kelowna really like it, actually, when I go up and talk about the issues in their community. Because A, it puts pressure on their local MLAs to actually represent the community, and people like that. And B, I think people want, especially in the Okanagan, they want competitive politics. They want both sides to present their views and have a choice in the election. Because a lot of people feel they haven't had that choice in the past, and I'm determined to give them that choice. And it'll be up to them as to how they vote in the region, but I'm very optimistic. Because I think we're going to have great candidates and a great campaign there.
It's interesting you say that, because in general, British Columbia elections do tend to be close. I mean, the provincial,
sure.
Our elections, 5 points is a big win in British Columbia. You win by 5 points, that's a big deal to beat the other party by that much. So our provincial campaigns are competitive, but I guess some ridings, you don't have the. Will you have the resources this time?
Oh, well, I think part of it is presence and determination. Like, I'll be in Kelowna during the next campaign. I don't think there's any question about that, and I'll go back there again and again. And I think being present in the community, attracting good candidates, and putting forward ideas that are specific to communities, which was our model in Vancouver Point Grey, is something that's going to work in ridings that we haven't seen before. And I think sometimes over time, communities change dramatically. I mean, we haven't, if you were in Kelowna 20 years ago, the community is enormously different today. There are new communities there, and they're large and growing and very dynamic, interesting economic changes. There's always been a wine industry, but a remarkable growth in the whole region of that industry. And I think people are changing. A lot of people, seniors in need of care, and I think the issues that I've been raising in that region and the issues the NDP has been raising are going to be appealing to people. And sometimes when you don't contest campaigns over time, you don't realize that communities are coming towards you. You give them an opportunity and a real choice, and I think we're going to do that in the next election, and I'm very optimistic about the result. I think that's, and I think it's good for politics. I don't think it's bad for politics. I think it's good to have people everywhere in the province have a choice.
I said I would refer in passing to the other number we had on that poll, and at the very end of the same slide it said leadership, right? So the question there on the last column was actually, who do you think would make the best premier? Pollsters ask these questions. So the first question related obviously to Christy Clark, so she's 47%. So she's got, and you're Adrian Dix, of course, so she's got a 2-to-1 lead over you there in answer to that question. Cause you any concern?
Well, I don't want to peak too early, Vaughn.
They did say in the poll, and I'm sure you know this too, that an awful lot of people said they didn't know enough about you,
That's right,
to form a strong opinion yet.
That's right, but I think it's important, and it's why I'm focused on the issues and change. Because what people tell me is that the Liberals on health care, for example, have not delivered for people. They don't have any plans. They don't have any idea on how to do that. They've given up on delivering public health care, and now they're just going to reduce the scope of public health care and leave people to their own devices. We ask these questions in the House all the time. Speaking of Kelowna, we asked a question about court delays and court problems, and the Attorney General gets up and he says, well, we don't have the money to prosecute criminals anymore in BC. Well, that's an incredibly pessimistic view of things. So what we want to do is present real alternatives for people. And I think you'll see those alternatives, if they're serious and they are put forward by our entire team, build the strength of our party. I think what the Liberals are doing, because they don't really have alternatives on the economy or healthcare and education, they're focusing simply on their leader and trying to put her in a position to shine. But it's not just a leader, it's a party, and it's a government, and it's a plan, and it's a program. And I think that's what people are looking for in an election.
We had a lot of questions on tape for Adrian Dix. I'd like to get to a few of them. So we might as well get started. Here from the House, Kevin Falcon.
The Leader of the Opposition, the NDP, are going to campaign to say, let's go back to the PSD. That's an entirely legitimate point of view. But as I pointed out to them, and you know as well as I do, you listen to Question Period every day, there is not a single question period that I can recall where they have not said government is not spending enough money in whatever ministry it happens to be. So they are going to have to explain how going back to a PST, which is going to take a hit on the provincial revenues just over a 2-year period of almost $3 billion, how they're going to square that with all the promises they're making.
Do you accept that $3 billion figure that he's using?
Oh, certainly not. And they don't accept it. I mean, 2009, Mr. Falcon, you just heard talk about $3 billion, and Mr. Hansen were telling everybody they could talk to that the tax was revenue neutral. In fact, they were telling us that the PST would raise more revenue. There'd be a net drop in revenue, right? Spring budget 2010, same thing. So now they're telling a whole different story with a whole different argument. I think people are saying, well, who do you believe? The BC Liberals last year, the BC Liberals this year, what Colin Hansen was saying, what Kevin Falcon was saying.
Well, the numbers are out of that Dinning report.
Well, that's one set of numbers. That's one set of numbers.
But you guys have used numbers out of the Dinning report on taxes, right?
Absolutely,
impact on
but here's the issue, and it's going to be an issue in the election campaign, is that they are unbelievable on the numbers. I mean, over 10 years, they've run a deficit. We know that. Over 10 years, they've run a deficit after passing balanced budget law outlawing deficits. Not over 1 year, but over 10. Just before the last election, they said it was a $495 million deficit. It turned out to be closer to $4 billion. A massive mistake on their part. Mistake, or some would argue, they misled people, right? The numbers keep changing on the HST. So one day it's revenue neutral, the next day it isn't. And those numbers are guiding policy decisions in their desperate campaign to try to save the HST. Right? So what I say is this. that the HST is bad for the economy. It's a $1.3 billion tax increase on working families and on small business. That's what they're doing. And that I'm against it, and that we'll address those issues, and everything we do in election campaign will be costed. Now, it's interesting, because Mr. Falcon last week was talking about us raising taxes on small business. We're not going to raise taxes on small business. We're going to maintain the small business tax changes that the government has made, right? But he was attacking me last week for saying that I would use carbon tax revenues for transit, right? And roll back, and other things, but for transit in part, and roll back corporate tax cuts. Well, who was talking about using the carbon tax revenues for transit this week?
I know the answer.
It was
to that
Christy
one.
Clark.
Christy Clark.
So last week, Kevin Falcon was calling what Christy Clark said this week irresponsible. They can't even get through a week with these discussions. But it does have an implication for an election campaign, and it's this. I mean, ordinarily, you have to trust the government's numbers when you put together your program, right? So often you'll use the Treasury Line Board base of their numbers and what comes out of the budget, and you use that as the basis for your program. And the government, Ms. Clark, Mr. Falcon, are so untrustworthy on the numbers these days that it's going to be a challenge for us as we try and define our agenda and say how we're going to pay for our agenda in the next election. It's a serious question, but they have so undermined public confidence in the very numbers they use, because they change day by day and week by week, that that's going to be a challenge for us too.
I heard you say, and I know you said it in your speech to the party governing council, that you intend to lead the fight against the HST. You are going to take on the HST yourself.
Bet. Right. You bet.
So you're not going to let Van der Zalm run this one?
Oh, look, everybody can take part, right? Everybody can take part in the HST campaign. Remember what's happening here. There are no spending limits, so there's going to be massive spending by supporters of the HST. There are going to be businesses in this province that will make tens of millions of dollars off the HST, and they will be spending unlimited amounts of cash without having to declare that, right? The government is using public funds. Mr. Falcon is using public funds to campaign on the HST. I watch a hockey game. I see there Mr. Falcon and Premier Clark stick men running around the screen. I just think I'd rather spend money keeping group homes open for people with developmental disabilities. I just think it's absurd for them to be spending public funds at the end of years of spending public funds trying to sell the HST to do it now. So against all that, I'm going to be making the case that this is a major tax increase on families, and that's what it is. Obviously, they misled people about it. Everybody knows that. They seem to sort of acknowledge that now. But really what this is a major tax shift onto families.
But people asked last year why Van der Zalm was leading the fight. Why wasn't the leader of the NDP? And what you're telling me is this year people are going to see the leader of the NDP leading the fight against the tax.
Well, I disagree a little bit with the analysis of last year. I mean, within a week of the tax being announced, I was standing beside Carol James with a sign opposing the HST. I personally went out and got thousands of petitions, went door to door in my constituency, as did most NDP MLAs. I mean, the people on the ground who
but you signed to get the petition registration, you had to apply to Van der Zalm.
Well, but look, it was an extraordinary success, I think, the initiative campaign, and I went out and got petition names, and most of the NDP MLAs I know went out and got petition names, and we were the people, in many ways, who drove that campaign, as were many ordinary British Columbians who were fed up with what the government had done, which is a major tax transfer onto families. That's what they were doing. So I don't know who led the campaign. I'm not that concerned who gets the credit. I'm saying that I'm going to be out there making the case for families in this campaign, and that's what I'm going to do. I think one of the people beside me, I think, will be Carol James.
Jock Finlayson, question for Adrian Dix. Here's Jock.
Your predecessor, Carol James, was committed to greater discussion and dialogue with the business community. Some people in the NDP, notably Bill Thielman, among others, were very critical of Carol James for that. My question is, as the leader of the party and a potential premier, what strategy are you going to use to reach out and engage in dialogue with BC's business community?
Well, today I was meeting with an important group of BC business people this morning in Vancouver. I'm going to meet with them on a regular basis. I've met with small business representatives. In fact, my family, my dad has run our family business in Vancouver for 42 years. He and my mom run the business.
Insurance?
So, insurance agency, yeah, and he's still there. He's 80 years young and still running the business, and he's, and you know, so I understand, I think, what family businesses go through. It's a real challenge, for example, because in many ways your pension is tied up in your business, and in many ways your equity is tied up in your expertise and your skill. My dad's worked in the insurance industry for 65 years. I mean, he has an enormous amount to offer his clients, and they love him. And so that's not a pitch for the business. I'm just saying, you know, where that,
go ahead.
but you know, that's what they've done, right? And so I'm obviously want business and will consult with business on a regular basis, but not just with business. That's the difference, I think, between myself and the BC Liberals.
Take a brief break on Voice of BC. Stay with us with Adrian Dix. More to come.
Mr. Dix obtained the NDP leadership by running to the left to get the votes of ideological party members. He also got it by selling a lot of memberships in one ethnic community. That's not the start of a broad-based approach to getting the middle.
Your source for in-depth local political coverage. This is Shaw TV, your local voice.
Crime happens, but where it happens and who becomes the victim can be influenced by you and your community. As the eyes and ears of their neighborhoods, Block Watch programs assist police by reporting suspicious activity.
I'm witnessing a theft from a vehicle.
To learn more about crime prevention in your neighborhood, contact your local police department or the Block Watch Society of BC.
If you would like to contact us at Voice of BC, write to us. Our mailing address is 111 1925 Blanchard Street, Victoria, BC, V8T 4J2, or send us an email to vobc@shaw.ca.
What's your thing?
Bugs. My thing's sound effects. Here's a T-Rex.
Mom! Mom! Aiden cut me in half again!
Nobody's good at everything, but everybody's good at something. What's your thing?
Voice of BC House Vaughn Palmer said of Adrian Dix, "Think Glenn Clark without the charisma." I wonder if Adrian has a similar rejoinder for Vaughn.
Welcome back to Voice of BC. Go ahead.
No, Vaughn. You see, this is part of my charm offensive. I think your tie looks lovely tonight.
It's probably crooked again. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Let's go to Hochstein. Now, speaking of a charm initiative, here's Phil Hochstein.
Adrian, the last time the NDP ran an election based on motivating its base, it made a sharp turn to the left. It pitted workers against employers, public sector against the private sector, and led to a strike in capital in British Columbia. Given your take-no-prisoners approach to BC politics, how are you going to be able to attract business, investment, and jobs to BC if you become Premier of British Columbia?
I don't know. Is he talking about 72, 52? I don't know what he's talking about in terms of which election.
1996, I think.
1996, I think. Well, you know, I think at the end of those years, we left the BC Liberals with 2 consecutive balanced budgets. During the NDP years, economic growth on average per year was higher than under the BC Liberals.
He said there was a capital strike.
Oh, I just think the evidence doesn't bear that out. What happened in that period was 2 things. I mean, there was a serious problem in the Asian economy, which hurt our exports, and the value of our commodities was low. So even if you look at today, even during the recession, the price of copper, which is an important commodity in British Columbia, was between $4 and $5 the last couple of years. Under the NDP, it was 64 cents, and it doesn't matter who you are. If the international price is like that, it's going to be hard to make money and get investment in that resource. So I don't think that's correct. And if you look at economic growth in that period, economic growth 3% a year compared to 2% a year under the BC Liberals, compared to 2.8% a year under the social credit from 75 to 91. The NDP had, in absolute terms, the highest level of economic growth, but that's not important. What it shows is that over long stretches of time, the BC economy has been fairly stable. in the short term, it goes up and down quite a bit.
You wouldn't be concerned about the threat of a capital strike?
Oh, I'm not concerned with that. People, this is a prosperous place with a dynamic economy, and I'm not concerned about it at all. I think that what we need in British Columbia is a government that invests in education and training and research. We're going to do that. We need a government that's committed to using resources, such as our forest resources, our trees in British Columbia, to create jobs in British Columbia. People get most affected by the current government's policy of exporting raw logs, are small businesses as well as workers. If you manufacture a tree in British Columbia, you get per capita 5 times as many jobs as if you export it. So these are the kinds of steps that I think we need in British Columbia to address the economy. But on the key issues as well of government, I think we have to be prudent. You know, I got some criticism in the leadership campaign. People say, because I proposed specific, 2 specific tax increases to pay for things. But really that's a discipline that's important, because if something's important, you have to show how you're going to pay for it. Now Christy Clark is speculating that she might do some of the same things. You try and take those ideas, and I say feel free. You know, I mean, I like to get my ideas put into practice as soon as possible, so I'm not concerned about that. But I would say this, that is an important, prudent approach, and that's the kind of approach that I'll take if I'm in government, which is to ensure when I go before the electorate that people know what I'm going to do.
Well, you just mentioned Christy Clark. Here she is talking about the by-election in Vancouver Point Grey.
From the very beginning, I was knocking on doors and people were saying to me, you know, I just talked to a New Democrat who told me that you are going to cancel Medicare. And I talked to senior citizens who were telling me that, and they were scared by that. And that was how the campaign started off. And, you know, it's like, I just think it's one thing to say things that are true about other people. It is another thing to say, it's another thing to try and just scare people by lying. And that's what we saw, I think, from the New Democrats from the very beginning in this campaign.
So it sounds like this is going to be a pretty rough election.
Oh, but let's be specific about the Medicare issue, right? Because what Ms. Clark said, what Premier Clark said, was that she was going to reduce health care expenditures to the rate of economic growth. And she was ridiculed, not by me. I didn't ridicule her. It's $517 million this year. She was ridiculed by George Abbott and by Kevin Falcon during the leadership campaign, right? Her ideas, you know, really are ridiculous. They would cause massive cuts in our public health care system, and no government would be proceeding with that. But that's what she's proposed. That's what she has on the record. Now, what have I proposed? A prescription drug plan that makes sense, the use of nurse practitioners, practical things to improve the public health care system. And so I understand that there's complaining going on there, but that's what she proposed, right? Without thinking about it, without really saying how she would even possibly consider doing that. That's what you're talking essentially about, the acute care budget for the whole Northern Health Authority, right? That's what she's talking about cutting. And last year it would have been more the cut, right? Because economic growth was slower last year. So you're talking about in the range of a $750 million cut. That was her proposal, without any evidence, without any specifics. And I, on the other hand, and our candidate, made specific proposals to improve public health care. So I understand that is uncomfortable for the BC Liberals, but we're going to continue to be specific and contrast our positions, which address the issues in a practical way and save money. I'll give you another example. You know, we had Kevin Falcon say we're talking about spending money every day. Well, today we asked them in the House about their plans about generic drugs. I mean, they put together a plan that's costing British Columbia $157 million. Now, don't you think overpaying for generic drugs by $157 million is a bad idea? Or there isn't better things in our healthcare system to use that money for? I think there is.
No answer in the House on that one, by the way. Paul Ramsey, let's see what former NDP finance minister who brought in the last balanced budget under the NDP. Paul Ramsey, here he is.
I think that this is one of the clearest contrasts we have. There's Christy, and she presents herself very well, as you say. I'd essentially say she has sort of an Oprah Winfrey approach. She's well known, she's well liked, and she talks in lovely little sound bites. Adrian, when he talks, by God, you're going to get the statistics, the facts, and the reasons for whatever policy he's advocating, and he's going to do it in a very, very serious way. Well, as you say, the conventional wisdom is that that style just doesn't play on television.
The comment on a Dix scrum is bring extra tape or even perhaps a second recorder, because he does tend to talk a lot.
You know what, I used to be health critic and I was behind George Abbott. You know, you'd have to bring 2 extra tapes because we would talk about. I think the problems facing BC are serious problems. They're real problems, right? I mean, the struggles in our emergency rooms today. The fact that in forestry, you know, because we've been harvesting the pine beetle wood, and now, you know, that's going away, and we're going to have to deal in the next number of years with a decline in the annual allowable cut. These are serious questions, but you know, they matter to people in community. If you've got a job in a forest community, you want a leader who's going to take that seriously and work with people in the community and get the best answer for you and represent you and your family, and that's what I'm going to do. And that doesn't always come in a soundbite. You know, you'd like to be able to provide that sometimes, but I think that people want serious answers to serious questions, and I'm optimistic that they'll want that in the next election.
I'm glad we have a 1-hour show.
We'll keep it going. We can
Greg
go to 2.
Thomas, Canadian Taxpayers Federation. He first raised this issue when he was on the show, and he's really pushing it. Here's Greg.
Well, the BC Liberals have punched through 3 successive increases to medical services plan premiums in the space of just over 2 years. That's about 19%. And families are now paying $1,536 a year for a tax that MLAs don't pay, provincial government employees don't pay. In fact, most people with a connection to the BC government don't pay this tax at all. Is this really fair, and what is the NDP going to do about it?
I don't think it's fair. On January 1st this year, right, they increased medical services premiums by 6% again, third year in a row. Third year in a row, so 18% over 3. In 2002, as you recall, they increased them by 50%. And this is what we're seeing as a tax shift that I'm glad to see the Canadian Taxpayers Federation on board for this. It's a tax shift onto flat taxes. This is what they're doing. They're increasing these taxes and using the money to cut, for example, the minimum tax on the banks. So that's where the shift has been, right? $108 million in the first 6% increase in medical services premiums, almost offset, setting the tax cut to the bank. So you're seeing a cut in some taxes and an increase in long-term care fees and MSP premiums. And I think we have to go. I think we have to go in another direction. Now, can you do it in one fell swoop? No. I think you got to look at these incremental increases though and say that this is not. This is enough, that we shouldn't be seeing more increases in MSP premiums, that it's too much for families. And look, a family of 4 earning $35,000 a year pays the same MSP premium as a family of 4 earning $234,000 a year. And I think other provinces have systems that are somewhat similar to this, well, not the same premium model, but they're far more progressive. And so you've got a series of tax changes that shift tax burden onto families. And that's why the HST is almost a step too far for the government. I mean, if they hadn't been increasing MSP premiums and proposing to increase hydro rates and ferry rates and on it goes, then the $1.3 billion increase in families in the HST wouldn't be so bad. But it's on top of all that they're shifting more taxes onto families.
Jock Finlayson again, healthcare again.
Mr. Dix, when you served as the opposition health critic, you often criticized the government for not spending enough on health care, even though the health budget's been growing about 3 times faster than overall provincial spending here and indeed all across Canada. If you form government, what will you do to manage health care costs? First question. And second, how many more years can we really tolerate health care expanding 3 or 4 times faster than the economy?
First of all, healthcare is about the same share of the economy as it was 20 years ago. So there's a debate about that. And what's really driving healthcare costs are increase in private costs. That's what we've seen over the last 20 years. I'll give you an example. Prescription drug costs,
drug costs, yeah.
Which are partly public with the pharmacare program, but 51% were public when the NDP left office. Now it's probably closer to a third. Right? And that isn't because the government has cut it. They've increased pharmacare budget, but the cost of prescription drugs has risen so much, 385% per capita over 20 years, right? 385%. So that's a significant increase that you have to address. So what do? Well, first of all, I think a program that kept BC's costs lower than other jurisdictions was reference-based pricing. The current government wanted to get rid of it. They couldn't afford to get rid of it, but they haven't expanded it. I think probably we should consider expanding it to statins, save money. The Therapeutics Initiative clearly shown that it saves money and saves lives. We should expand the Therapeutics Initiative to make sure that that happens. There are about 600 what are called drug detailers in BC who sell prescription drugs to doctors. We need more academic detailers to get better prescribing information. If you look at some of the reports, you'll see that in some communities the same drug will be prescribed dramatically more than in other communities, and we need to have best practices. And there's a trade agreement right now, the Canada-Europe trade agreement that Mr. Falcon and Ms. Clark and all of them support, which will dramatically increase the cost of prescription drugs because it's going to expand patent protection for European drug companies. Can you believe it? So they make that decision in Ottawa. Premier Clark supports them, and it's going to cost our healthcare system $250 million. And so these are the kinds of changes you have to make. And I think more broadly, what the government has done in healthcare is pushed everything through the emergency room. Not a surprise that in Vernon and Westminster and Surrey and lots of places, the emergency rooms are a problem because the less expensive care has all been cut. And so the only place open in healthcare is often the emergency room. Now, a hospital bed, people say it's different in different places, about $1,000 a day. Long-term care bed, between $100 and $200 a day in public costs, generally. Obviously, home care and home support, much less. So what you have to do in the health care system, as much as you can, is use prevention and shift costs to provide better services in the community, better primary care services. And we're going to need to do that because we're going to have a lot more people with diabetes in the next few years, which is a far more significant threat in terms of costs of the healthcare system than what people talk about, which is an aging population.
Welcome back to the second hour of I couldn't resist. I couldn't resist. I couldn't resist.
I have a whole 2-hour speech on prescription drug policy.
We can do our mutual charm initiative. Let's try George Heyman. Good question from George on emissions. Here he is.
Yeah.
In the recent NDP leadership race, all the front-running candidates called for an acceptance of the carbon tax, but proposals to make it more effective and more equitable. Could you specify exactly what you will do as leader of an NDP government in order to ensure that we properly price carbon emissions, but that we do it in a fair and equitable manner throughout society?
Well, if you look at the carbon tax, it hasn't, in fact, had much impact on emissions. In fact, emissions have gone up. It's one of the reasons the carbon tax is making us more money. That's a sign that emissions are going up. So what I've said is that we have to use at least some of the carbon tax money to pay for environmental measures, like transit. So what the government has done is they've given away more in tax cuts than they've taken in carbon tax revenues. In fact, there's a net deficit on the carbon tax. And so they've given tax cuts generally a big share of them to large corporations, and we're all paying the carbon tax. It's one more of those tax shifts onto middle-income people. So what I've said is we have to roll back some of those tax cuts that they gave. So the ones in 2008, July 1st, the one on January 1st, 2010, the one on January 1st, 2011.
These are the corporate ones,
those are the
not
corporate
the income
ones. Not the income one, not the small business one. Those are the corporate ones. And use that money to invest in reducing emissions, things such as public transit, but different things in rural BC as well. And if we do that, we can have far more success than the government has had in terms of reducing emissions. But we also have to use regulatory means. I mean, we have.
I thought you were going to use those corporate taxes to pay for your student loan programs.
The bank programs. There was the second tax increase. One of the things I talked about was reinstating a minimum tax on banks. The tax on banks that had been in place since the 1970s.
But that tax, according to the public accounts, wasn't raising any money. That's why they got.
Well, the last year they had it, the minimum tax, in 2007, 2008, prior to the decision to get rid of it, brought in about $108 million, I think, in that year. In that range, right? In that range of tax between 100 and 110 million. It was the corporation capital tax on banks, right? On financial institutions.
Not
that was
the minimum
tax. And they were trying to transition to a minimum tax. It never really came into play. But the corporation capital tax on banks, which is the minimum tax on banks, had been in place, including for the first 7 years of the Liberal government. Was the finance minister, without consultation of the day, got rid of that tax. Now, since then, as you may know, the number of banking jobs in BC, financial services jobs, has declined. So the promise was get rid of this tax and it'll create jobs. Now they've seen an increase of jobs in Ontario, a decline in BC. And I say in that case, when we're talking about a student grant program, that we should use some of that revenue to pay for increased grants to students so they can have access to post-secondary education.
We will take a brief break on Voice of BC with Adrian Dix. Stay with us.
I could corner Adrian and ask him a question. I mean, I think there's always room for opposition. I think opposing every single thing isn't always productive, but a lot of times in governments, and this transcends, I mean, history, when you look at it, there's a lot of things the New Democrats right now are saying, spend more on, spend more on, spend more on. Virtually every question period, there's a kind of, I think that's the tendency. How are you going to pay for it?
Producing over 9,000 hours of local programming every year. This is Shaw TV, your local voice.
As I'm driving to work, I can feel the anxiety building. My stomach starts to get sick. I start to sweat.
It's a feeling of terror, like a life and death situation, basically.
I always feel like I'm, under a spotlight.
I would kill myself at a certain point if things didn't get better.
Anxiety and depressive disorders are the most common of all mental illnesses. For a free mental health screening, call our toll-free number or visit our website today.
Missed something on Voice of BC? Catch an encore presentation of this show on your local Shaw TV. If you live in the Lower Mainland, Voice of BC rebroadcasts Saturday morning at 10:30 and Sunday afternoon at 4. On Vancouver Island, watch Voice of BC Saturday at 10 a.m. or Sunday afternoon at 2. To find out when Voice of BC rebroadcasts in all other parts of the province, please contact your local Shaw TV or check the TV listings for your area.
Kidney disease affects an estimated 2 million Canadians. Many don't even know they have it. But thanks to the Kidney Foundation of Canada's innovative programs and vital research, countless people have been able to turn to us to help them manage, delay, and in some cases even prevent the disease. We're the Kidney Foundation of Canada. Please support us. We're behind you all the way.
I don't think Adrian can help himself. I think he is a pure partisan politician. I think he believes that what British Columbians need is that more left-of-center politics, back to the base of the unionism, social policy, the things that used to be what the NDP would stand on. And I think he won't be able to help himself from doing that. And he also likes the game of politics. And I think most people are sick of the game of politics.
Welcome back to Voice of BC, and we'll get to Adrian Dix's answer to that in a minute. Next week on the show, doing a show on mental health and mental illness, Dr. Perry Kendall and Bob Plekas, and looking forward to that one, so that'll be next week's show. Tonight, we're here with Adrian Dix. Do you want to answer the left and political junkie comments?
Oh, look, I mean, I'm interested in bringing change in public policy. And I think one of the things since I've been an MLA, people have known me for was being critic for children and family development and being critic for health. And unlike a lot of people in opposition who, who make really good speeches, I mean, lots of us do, and I do some of that as well, that are partisan and everything else. I tried to bring change in both those areas, and I think the record shows that we brought real change. Like, I thought it was really important for the province that we have an independent child representative back. Because in my experience, people were coming to me with problems involving children in care that I shouldn't properly be dealing with. They dealt with issues of privacy, and we needed someone with the statutory authority to do that. And so I raised those issues. And I think in a very respectful way. I think the late Stan Hagen, who was minister at the time, they were difficult debates for him because he was really defending policies of Christy Clark and previous ministers, which had failed, right? But Stan and I had a very respectful debate. There wasn't a clapping in the House. I asked very pointed questions, but factual questions, and he responded. And at the end of that, in March of the following year, of a really half of a year of debating those issues, the independent children representative was restored, and a lot of money was restored to the Children's Ministry. I'm very proud of it, and I am happy to give other people credit, including the minister credit, for responding at the time, right? And the same thing in healthcare. I've raised lots of issues for children getting access to insulin pumps. So I think that that's what you do in politics. You use, and I'm ambitious in the sense that I was elected in 2005. You never know if you'll be elected again. I wanted to bring some changes for my constituents and for people, and I think I succeeded in doing that. And I respect everybody. I respect Bob's point of view. He's an independent member now, and he's working hard for his constituents too.
people say you're a workaholic.
I work hard. I don't think I'm a workaholic, though. I love to spend time with Renee, my wife Renee. I love to read. I love to go to movies. Love to watch sports. Love to play sports. So I love to do all kinds of other things in the community. So I don't know. I think I work hard, though. Yeah.
You know your stuff. I mean, people say that about you, and you don't get to that level of knowledge about all that stuff if you don't work bloody hard.
Yeah, and I'm inspired by. I mean, this was a wonderful thing. This leadership campaign for all of us, and you saw it in the candidates. That when I worked for Canadian Parents for French before I became an MLA, I think I traveled the whole province. I went to every school district, I think, with a French immersion program. There were about 40 at the time. I traveled the province. I got to know the province really well at the time. And in this leadership campaign, I went to 49 communities. Mike Farnworth and John Horgan, Nick Simons, Dana Larson did the same. And I think we're better representatives as a result. I mean, if you're learning and you're curious, and you go to Hazelton and you see the issues in Hazelton, and you go to Nelson, you see the issues in Nelson and in Caslow and the Slocan Valley and everywhere in the province, I think you can't help but be a better politician. I think that's probably true for the Liberal candidates as well.
You know, he does these long scrums with the media in English, and then he does them at the same length for Radio Canada. That's how he keeps his French up.
That's right.
You can talk to your Quebec caucus in a way that...
Well, exactly. You know, it's very exciting what's going on. You know, the NDP convention is coming to Vancouver in June, so you get a chance to meet a lot of our new MPs from Quebec.
That's right, it is.
Lots of them are extremely interesting people. It's going to be a very interesting week.
Well, let's see what else we can get through before we come to the end of this show. Ben Parfitt, here he is.
The Liberal government very clearly has staked a lot of ground on the need to accelerate oil and gas developments in the northeast of the province to generate revenues for the provincial treasury. Is that a position that the NDP adheres to as well? And also, I wonder what your opinion is about putting the brakes, perhaps for now, on shale gas developments in the province, slowing those developments down so that we can get a better handle on the environmental impacts.
I mean, I think we have to look at the environmental impacts across the piece. There's another issue. There's the issue of fracking. There's the issue of whether this level of development is sustainable. Obviously, it's important, though, for the provincial finances. And so you have to keep these things in balance, and I'll certainly do that. It was NDP policies in 1998 and 1999 that, to some degree, started the process of development there, increased revenues that the Liberal Party benefited from subsequently, and I think you have to keep these things in balance and work with the industry, work with environmentalists to make sure that the environment is protected. On the issue, and just to talk about the issue of fracking, which is a really important issue a lot of people are interested in BC.
Forced water under pressure into shale rock, it fractures the rock and releases the natural gas in it.
That's right, and it's a use of water that's quite expensive. I mean, in our system, water, when it comes from Wilson Lake, for example, it can be used to run through the reservoir, but it also has really unknown environmental effects, and a lot of jurisdictions are looking at that, and I think we need to review it. Because, you know, I'm not an expert in that area. However hard I might work, I'm not going to be an expert in that area. But I think the people who are experts should take a look at it and provide us with the best possible advice.
Ben Parfitt again, another question, NDP resource policy.
Many members of the NDP, yourself included, I believe, have expressed concerns about the number of raw logs being exported from British Columbia. More broadly, however, I think there's a significant question about how we move forward in this province in encouraging companies to do more by way of adding value to forest products. And I'm wondering what the NDP's position is on trying to put policies in place that are going to put more men and women back to work in the forest industry.
I think this is going to be a central question in a lot of communities in the next election campaign. Vancouver Island, 23%, according to the government, 23% of the cut is going out as raw logs. That's a lot of jobs leaving the province, right? So some steps have to be taken to make it economic for domestic manufacturers to get access to that wood.
You can't stop the exports overnight.
Oh, yeah, you can't stop them. You can take steps, though. You can absolutely take steps, and we will take steps to address that. And the government, I don't think, is applying its own rules, and I think we have to also take steps to make it more economic, to improve the competitive position of domestic mills, and that may mean taxing logs that leave the province. Because on Vancouver Island, for example, it's often the private land is Crown Grant Forest land, and so you have to take one set of actions there. You obviously have more control on Crown land. But I think this is a really significant time for the forest industry in BC. I mean, we're going to see prices go up significantly. Forest companies will be making quite a bit of money in the next few years. And the question is, will we become an export economy of raw logs, creating relatively few jobs? Or will the government intervene to ensure that small business in forestry gets access to trees, and that jobs are a priority? And that in those communities where we see a decline in the annual allowable cut, will they have a government prepared to step in and support communities, yes or no? And that's a difference between ourselves and the Liberal Party, and it's a very important and substantive issue in the community. And I say most people in BC agree with me that, that raw log exports aren't a good idea.
Sean Holman.
Adrian, if you became Premier of British Columbia, would you put an end to secret union certification balloting?
He means the secret ballot for union certification. I think that's
I think he's talking about that. I mean, I think that people should
have
a
labor code change.
I think people should have a right to join a union, and I think increasingly they don't in this province. And we see, you know, I see it every day. I'm an advocate for farm workers. They had rights taken away by this government. Healthcare workers had rights taken away from this government. And yeah, we'll work with both sides, but I think people should have a right to join a union, yes I do.
You'd make it easier for them to do that?
I think people should have a right to do it, and it'll be up to them to choose whether they do it or not, but we're going to allow them that right, and I think that's, in an open society, an open economy, that's a good thing. And unions,
last time you were on the show when you were a health critic, not last time, but one of the times you were on the show when you were health critic, somebody reminded me of this today. You suggested that people, doctors and nurses shouldn't be able to work in both a private system and a public healthcare system. If they were working at private clinics, they shouldn't also be working in the public system.
Well, that's not what I think in terms of doctors. That's the law, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, what happens is, and there's some doctors who just work in the private system, and there's
some work in both.
It's always been the right. Well, you got to be careful. I mean, there's several public systems, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, if you're going to your family practice doctor, they have a private corporation, but all their billings are coming in.
But I mean the private clinic
side. The private clinic side, some of them are in the public WCB system, which is allowed in the Canada Health Act, and it's an issue, and I don't like it, but that's an issue. And they're getting a certain amount of business there. But there's issues before the courts right now. Clearly, for example, some clinics are breaking the law, and the government knows they're breaking the law, and they haven't taken action. And it means that people are being charged illegally too much to get care, and that other people are waiting in line too long, and I don't agree with
that. Bob Simpson again, here he is.
I believe British Columbians, in fact, most Canadians are sick of the politics of division. They're sick of the pure partisanship that occurs in our legislative assemblies and in Parliament in Ottawa. What are you going to do to foster a more constructive relationship with the new Premier? We have a new leader for both parties. Can we not get to a more constructive, more deliberate politics in BC?
Is that compatible with our system?
I think what you do is you make serious proposals to improve things for the people of the province. You know, one of your colleagues in the media said I made a proposal to ban cosmetic pesticides, you know, the use of them. And the Premier said she thought that was a good idea. And they said, oh, you must be disappointed. You know, she took the issue away from me. I don't think that way. I think that's a great thing. And that's why I went to Kelowna and made specific proposals to assist the tree fruit industry and challenge the government to take action now, because I think the industry's in trouble. We need action now. Even if an election were in the fall, it would be too late for a lot of people in the industry. So I think the way you deal with it is make positive proposals. I was a member, Vaughn, of the Health Committee of the BC Legislature in my entire time as health critic. 4.5 years I was health critic, which was quite a long time. And the Health Committee never met. Now, I was told by some government members they didn't meet because they didn't want to give me a platform or something, but which seems like a really lousy thing to do considering all the issues facing healthcare. But I think we need to use committees more, and it's really a responsibility for all of us, right? When the House doesn't sit more than 4 days in 10 months, that's people in the political process disrespecting the work they themselves do. But that's worse for the NDP, I'd argue, than the Liberals, because we have more belief in and more optimism and more belief in the ability of us as a community to take action on things. So when the Liberals make politics more cynical, that's what people expect from them. But it's hurtful to the NDP, which I think needs to mobilize more people and more of the community to get things done. So we're going to try and deal with that by making positive proposals and putting them to people.
Here's Sean Holman again. This is not, I assure you, a trick question.
Adrian, how do you feel about the media in this province? Do you think that the media is out to get you and the NDP?
You notice I didn't put this in a part of the show where you had an hour to answer.
No. I think it's always been difficult, right? And there's always been challenges in getting a message out. And that's true of everyone today. We have a much more divided media today in terms of ratings, in terms of getting a message out, right? There's all kinds of opportunities, new opportunities on the internet, and new voices on the internet, which I think is a very exciting thing. But on the other hand, when you have the hourly news shows losing ratings and more television stations, when you get try and get a message out, only some people hear it, right? I'll just give you an example. Your newspaper, the Vancouver Sun, which is the leading newspaper in BC, the highest circulation daily in BC, is probably the 5th highest rated circulation daily in my constituency, right? And that's a change. There's great opportunity in that. So there's Tsingtao, there's Mingpao and World Journal in the province, and then the SkyTrain papers, right? All those papers are involved. So there was a time in politics where if I was representing Vancouver Kingsway and I was able to get a message out in the Vancouver Sun or write an article, a lot of people would see it. Now I've got to look at all kinds of different challenges in doing that. So I think it's always been hard. And I mean, you know, some people in the NDP like to complain about the media we get, but in the 1930s, our predecessors in the CCF, I mean, the papers, they'd take stands in favor of the right to vote for Chinese Canadians or something, and they would be virulently attacked. It's always been hard for people, and I think complaining about it doesn't do any good. I think you've got to believe that, have faith in people and faith in the process, and the people who work in the media in BC work very hard.
Some of us. The government today took the wraps off.
Name names.
Yeah. Okay, you first. The government in British Columbia today took the wraps. The BC Hydro went to environmental review of the Site C hydroelectric dam, which has been talked about in this province for longer than I've been doing political columns, which is a long time. The only consistent thing about it is every time they talk about it, the price tag goes up, as you can expect.
Sure.
I think we're at $8 billion now, although there's only a one-paragraph statement in the environmental review explaining how we got to $8 billion, so I would think that number is somewhat flexible. What's your view? This is a public power project, and it's a big one.
Yeah.
And I know there are some New Democrats who have some enthusiasm for the idea. What's your view?
We got to reinvigorate the BCUC and have them take a look. I mean, we've bought a whole bunch of private power, which, by the way, is a lot more expensive than what we're talking about at Site C. But we've bought a lot of it now, and we have to deal with that. My own view is the best and most efficient and the best job-creating thing we could do right now is invest in conservation, retrofitting of buildings, put a lot of people to work, save money, and in terms of the cost, the savings per kilowatt hour, they're much higher on those kind of conservation projects. But we should give power back to the BCUC, have them look at the private power projects, have them look at Site C.
And on that note, we appear to have used up the entire amount of time. Thank you very much to Adrian Dix for being on the show.
Great to be on the show. Hour 2 will continue now.
Hour 2 will continue afterward, and I'll go ask all the questions I didn't get to. And maybe we'll even name names.
Absolutely.
Next week on Voice of BC, we're going to do a show on mental illness and mental health. Dr. Perry Kendall, Bob Plekas. Good discussion there. Dr. Kendall knows his stuff, and Bob's going to talk a lot about how things get done and don't get done in government. So it's a good show. Thank you for watching Voice of BC, bringing the legislature, BC politics into your living room. Thank you to Adrian Dix, and good night.